Hey everyone, welcome to Karenology. Today's story will make you laugh, cringe, and probably yell at your screen. Let's go. The sheriff's truck was still blocking my driveway when I stepped out onto the porch with my thermos of coffee. The blue lights reflected off the window of my father's old barn, and I could hear my dog Scout growling low in his throat. They'd come before dawn. Again. This time they had a warrant, or at least they claimed to. I didn't invite them in. I stood there in my robe and boots, staring down 3 deputies like it was 1979 and I was back on the job. "We got a call about illegal hunting on residential land," said the youngest of them. His vest looked too big for his frame. He tried to sound firm, but his voice cracked just slightly. I nodded toward the tree line. "That's federal land behind those pines, son. And I've got every permit you can imagine. You want to see 'em? They're filed alphabetically in the cabinet behind my reloading bench. Knock yourself out." He didn't respond. He just shifted on his feet, clearly not expecting a man who looked like he'd walked out of an old war photo to be quoting federal code like a textbook. That morning, as they backed out and left tire tracks in the dew, I knew something had changed. This wasn't just about me hunting ducks. This was war. It started a few months earlier, when I moved back into the house my father built. After 30 years in the field as a federal wildlife officer, I was tired. But not the kind of tired that makes you weak. More like the kind of tired that makes you sharp. I needed quiet, and the lake behind the house had always been that. Still waters, broken only by migrating wings and the wind in the reeds. Then came Silver Pines. A new Homeowner Association subdivision popped up across the lake. Gated, smug, artificial, the kind of place where people use words like curated and amenities. Their houses stared at mine like plastic teeth across the water, and with them came Karen Marshall, president of the Homeowner Association, self-appointed steward of everything she could see. She found me on my dock one morning, holding a thermos in one hand and a longbow in the other. I'd just taken a goose and was watching the clouds roll in. "Excuse me," she barked. "Are you the one who's been shooting?" "Only if the birds got feathers," I said, not turning around. She marched closer. Overdressed. Overdosed on perfume. Eyes like polished ice. "This is a residential area, sir. Discharging weapons is strictly against HOA regulations. This is not your land," I replied. "And you don't get to make laws." She blinked, clearly unaccustomed to being told no. "You'll be hearing from the board." She wasn't lying. Within the week, I started getting letters. First passive-aggressive, then just aggressive. Claims of noise complaints, wildlife endangerment, even threats of civil action. She called the local paper, said I was disturbing families, that children were afraid. The next day I saw my name in a headline, painted as some kind of backwoods menace with a crossbow. They thought I'd back down, that I'd be embarrassed. But I wasn't new to pressure, and I sure as hell wasn't new to politics disguised as policy. I filed a counter notice with the county and sent certified letters to the zoning office, the Department of Natural Resources, and the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service. I knew what she was after. Karen wanted my land. Wanted it quiet, clean, sterile. Something she could show off at open houses across the lake. My old cabin and duck decoys didn't fit her brochure. I didn't go looking for a fight. But I don't walk away from one either. Especially when it's about land my father left me, and the one damn place on earth that still made sense. That night, I sat at my desk with a mug of black coffee, reading through old survey maps. I found a notarized plat from 1974 that showed the access road was built before any of the HOA property even existed. It was a small thing, but I smiled. My daddy always said, "If you want to beat a weasel, show him the trap he walked into." I didn't know it then, but the trap had just snapped shut. I just needed to find the rest of the teeth. I woke up the next morning to the sound of hammering. Not the kind you hear from a neighbor patching a fence, but something industrial, rhythmic, and deliberate. Scout was already barking by the back door. I pulled on my jeans and boots and stepped outside, half expecting another squad car. Instead, I saw a crew of workers in neon vests unloading concrete posts onto the public trail that wrapped around the lake. Karen stood nearby, arms crossed, watching them with the satisfaction of a general directing troops. One of the workers glanced my way, then looked quickly back down. They were building a gate on county land. I walked straight up to her. "You're blocking the wildlife corridor." Karen didn't flinch. "This path has been misused for too long. The Homeowner Association is simply taking steps to secure the area." "Hush, Karen. That's a public easement. It was designated for federal wildlife passage and foot access in 1969. She smiled. That thin, smug smile. "Our legal team believes otherwise." Of course they did. And I'm sure their legal team also believed they could intimidate me into giving up, but I'd seen worse. I'd been dropped into swamps tracking illegal gator poachers. I'd been shot at more than once. This wasn't fear, it was theater, and I was tired of watching from the audience. I drove straight to the county land office. The clerk, a young man named Reed, barely looked up from his phone when I walked in. But when I handed him the easement file, he sat up straighter. "This isn't scanned in. I've never seen this map before." "Because no one's needed it since before you were born," I said. "But you're going to need it now." Reed made a few calls. Promised to escalate. I left with copies of the original designation documents, signed in ink older than half the people in that HOA boardroom. When I got home, someone had slashed my truck tires. I didn't call the sheriff. I didn't waste the breath. Instead, I installed trail cameras. Hidden ones. Not the kind you find at Walmart either. These were high-res, infrared, motion-sensitive. Leftovers from a sting op I ran on an illegal elk rancher back in 2003. That night, I sat on the porch, sharpening a broadhead, waiting. Scout lay by my feet, ears twitching. Around midnight, a figure moved at the edge of my property line. Hooded. Fast. I let them go. Didn't move. Just watched the red light blink as the camera did its job. The next morning, I reviewed the footage. It was a young man, late 20s, maybe. He planted a yard sign that read, "Danger, unregistered hunting zone." The letters were made to look like official state signage. I recognized the guy. Karen's son, Josh. A dropout. Always looking for shortcuts. Guess he figured intimidating me would earn him points at Mommy's Tea Club. I compiled everything photos, footage, documentation, and emailed it directly to my old friend Fred Miker, now a field director with the State Wildlife Division. I didn't say much, just, "You might want to look into Silver Pines," Fred called that afternoon. "Jack," he said, "you still have that radar cam?" "You saw us at... I got two." Good. I'll be there Friday." We spent the weekend surveying the damage. Fred was furious, not just because of the signs, but because Karen's little fence project cut straight through a nesting ground for a protected species of marsh owl. That put them in violation of federal wildlife statutes. Fred filed an incident report, and things began to shift, quietly, legally, like the slow crack of ice before it breaks. But Karen wasn't done. 2 days later, I found the door to my father's barn wide open. Inside, every one of my duck decoys had been smashed. The ones he carved by hand in the 50s splintered. The shelves where he kept his tools were knocked over, coated in mud. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I just sat down on the bench, closed my eyes, and breathed in the scent of cedar and dust and old oil. My fists clenched, but my jaw stayed still. Then I stood up and I made a decision. If they wanted war, they just got one. I emailed the footage of Josh to Fred, sent a copy to the state attorney, and for good measure, I blind copied a local investigative reporter I'd met a few years back, Lauren Chase. She'd covered a story about illegal timber harvesting near the border. She knew what corruption looked like, and she had the spine to name names. That night, I saw a drone buzzing low over my roof. I smiled. Let them watch. They'd see a man preparing, not running. What they didn't know was that I had just found a set of maps older than any of them. And those maps were about to turn their world upside down. Fred returned the next morning with 2 agents from the Department of Wildlife Enforcement. He didn't bother with formalities. We walked the Eastern Trail, where Karen's concrete posts now stood like tombstones. One of the agents, Morales, crouched near the base of a torn-up bush and muttered, "That's owl nesting fiber. They're in violation, all right." By noon, they'd already photographed everything and called in an environmental impact review. Karen didn't know it yet, but her little empire had a ticking clock attached to it now. And I had just wound the spring. I spent the rest of the afternoon in my barn, rebuilding what I could. The shelves would stand again. The decoys, well, the ones that weren't shattered beyond recognition, I lined them up like soldiers on the bench. My father used to say, "Every man's got 2 choices. Let the world reshape him, or carve his own edge and hold it." I wasn't planning on being sanded down. Around dusk, Lauren Chase showed up. Worn boots, denim jacket, dark eyes with the kind of clarity you only get from seeing too many lies. She didn't waste time on small talk. "I want to see everything." I handed her the folders, the photos, the maps, the footage. She asked sharp questions, didn't write anything down, just listened. After an hour, she looked at me and said, "You realize what this is, right? It's not just HOA corruption. It's coordinated land theft. They're trying to turn this lake into a private recreational district. You're the last piece in the way." I nodded. "Then they're going to choke on me." That night, she camped in the guest room. In the morning, she brewed coffee, like she'd lived here for years, while I checked the trail cams. One had been yanked from the tree. Gone. I pulled another one from a pine, farther out, and reviewed the footage. Nothing but shadows. Until the final 30 seconds. A black SUV, no plates. Parked near the old ranger trail, then drove off. Lauren saw the screen and exhaled. They're getting nervous. I took the flash drive, sealed it in an envelope, and mailed it to Fred, just in case. 3 days passed. Then came the court summons. Karen had filed for a cease and desist order against me, accusing me of threatening behavior, environmental sabotage, and trespassing. The date was set for the following week. I called my daughter, Susan. She hadn't been here since her mother passed. "You're going to hear some things about your old man," I said. "I just want you to know the truth's got teeth." She showed up 2 days later. Kids in tow. 10 and 8. They ran through the yard like it was 1995 again. Scout barked himself hoarse trying to keep up. Susan didn't say much when she arrived, just hugged me for a long time and whispered, "We've got your back." On the day of the hearing, I wore my old ranger jacket. Still had the badge sewn inside. The courtroom was small, but packed. Karen sat across the aisle, flanked by lawyers in tailored suits. Josh looked uncomfortable, like a kid dragged to church after getting caught shoplifting. The judge listened. He watched, and then I handed over the documentation. Property records, wildlife protection violations, the easement maps, and, most importantly, the video of Josh trespassing. Lauren's article had dropped that morning too. Headline: A lake to be battle between conservation and greed in Silver Pines. When Karen's lawyer objected to the footage, claiming privacy violation, the judge raised an eyebrow. The sign he planted referenced state authority. Your client forged government materials. That's a felony, counsel. Karen's face drained of color. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The judge denied the order, and then, without prompting, requested an independent audit of the Homeowner Association's land acquisitions. He even invited Fred's department to file charges if evidence supported them. Outside, reporters waited. Lauren did the talking. I just stood behind her, arms crossed, watching Karen disappear into the backseat of her lawyer's car like a ghost trying to avoid the sun. That night, as we sat on the porch, Susan poured me a glass of bourbon. "You gonna stop now?" she asked. I looked out over the lake. The wind curled the water like breath on glass. "No, I'm just getting started," because winning a hearing wasn't justice. Justice would come when every nail they drove into this land was pulled back out, and the people who held the hammer were the ones who bled, and they would. The next blow didn't come in the form of another lawsuit or vandalism. It came through the wires. One crisp morning, just as the sun cracked over the pines, the lights flickered inside the house and died. I checked the breaker box. Nothing tripped. The barn, dark. Even the well pump was silent. I drove into town and spoke to Ed from the power company. He looked at his screen, scratched his head, and said, "You're flagged for a scheduled disconnect. Non-payment." I blinked. "That's impossible. I pay on auto draft." He dug deeper. Looks like someone manually filed a change of ownership request. New billing address, different account number. Let me guess, I said, already knowing. He hesitated. Well, the name on the new account is Karen Marshall. I didn't yell, didn't swear. Just stared at him long enough for the silence to turn sharp. Fix it, now! Back home, I ran an extension cord from the truck to the fridge to keep the food from spoiling. Then I opened the fireproof safe and pulled out every title, deed, and statement I had. It was time to go federal again. Lauren helped me write the full complaint. Data manipulation, fraudulent filings, utility interference. Fred added his signature on a letter from the Wildlife Department, stating that power disruption on designated conservation land constituted a breach of federal protection. But I knew we needed more than paper. We needed light. So I called in a favor. A friend from my academy days, now working in the office of the Inspector General. He agreed to take a look. Not officially, but close enough to make people sweat. While we gathered our ammo, Karen upped her game. Flyers started appearing in town. Crude photos of me holding a crossbow taken from across the lake. The caption read, "Should armed men patrol our family lakefront?" I recognized the typeface. HOA had a marketing guy. They were trying to sway public opinion. That same week, I came home to find the fence between my land and the trail painted bright red. A crude message sprayed across it. No kill zone. Yispe. It was psychological warfare. Plain and simple. But I dealt with worse in the bayous, in places where men vanished and were never written about. This wasn't fear. This was desperation from their side. What they didn't expect was the response. Susan went on the local radio, told the story with the calm fire only a daughter can wield. She didn't dramatize it, just laid it bare. Her voice shook once when she spoke about the broken decoys. Said they weren't just wood. Said they were memories she used to dust as a kid. People listened. Donations started showing up. Small bills in envelopes. Handwritten notes. We stand with you. Then came the veterans. Old friends. Old enemies. Folks who remembered my badge and what it stood for. They arrived in pickup trucks. Some with patches on their sleeves. Some with scars on their hands. They helped me fix the barn, fix the fence, fix the cameras. Karen tried to paint it as a militia, called the sheriff. Said I was hosting a radical group, but the sheriff, finally wise enough to stay neutral, just nodded and left. Then came the drone footage. Someone leaked a video of Karen meeting with a private developer near the Eastern Ridge, land that wasn't even for sale yet. She pointed at a map, drew imaginary lines with her finger, while a man in a suit nodded. Lauren traced the man to a real estate fund known for turning conservation land into golf communities. We had her, but we weren't done yet. The final push came from an unexpected place. The town historian, a wiry old woman named June Baker. She came to my porch one morning, holding a leather-bound ledger. I heard you were fighting ghosts, she said. Figured this might help. Inside were letters, surveys, and council meeting notes from 1957, back when the lake was designated a shared resource under a federal-local compact. That ledger proved that no private entity, including any HOA, had jurisdiction over shoreline activity. It was the nail in the coffin. Lauren published the story. Fred delivered the complaint. The Inspector General's contact flagged the utility tampering to the Department of Justice, and just like that, the air shifted. Karen's smile vanished from every community board. Her name scrubbed from the HOA directory. The concrete posts were ordered removed, and a formal ethics investigation opened into her brother's zoning office. But the best part? The lights came back on. One bulb at a time. Like the land itself was exhaling. And yet, I had the feeling the final reckoning was still ahead. The part where Karen would have to face the people, not just the law, and I planned to be right there, front row. The town meeting was scheduled for a Thursday night at the old community center. The kind with creaky folding chairs and fluorescent lights that hum louder than the people. I arrived early, wearing the same flannel shirt I'd worn when I buried my father. Scout waited in the truck. They packed the room. Residents from both sides of the lake, HOA members in pressed polo shirts, arms folded tight. Locals in work boots and denim, faces worn by time. I took a seat in the front row between Susan and June Baker, who brought the ledger like it was scripture. The moderator was a neutral pick, a retired judge named Harold Withers, gray as driftwood, but twice as sharp. He tapped the mic. This is a special session, not a trial. But what happens here may echo in courtrooms. Let's keep it civil. Karen took the podium first. She wore a pale blazer, pearls, and the same smile she'd used to lie for months. She opened with a speech about safety, community, and the unfortunate misunderstandings with local residents. She never said my name. But she didn't have to. Everyone knew. She spoke of threats, of aggression, of protecting families. She tried to cry. Nothing came. Then Lauren stood. She read from her article. Then displayed copies of land deeds, maps, and the HOA's forged signage on a projector. She showed the drone footage, the meeting with the developer, Karen drawing on a map like she owned the world. Gasps filled the room. Then came June with the ledger. She walked slow, deliberate, and read aloud the compact. From 1957, clear as day. The lakefront was a shared conservation resource under joint stewardship. No private body could claim jurisdiction. No homeowner association. No Karen Marshall. Karen tried to object. Judge Withers shut her down. You had your turn, Mrs. Marshall. Sit. Then he called my name. I stood, not to attack, just to speak. My father built our home when Eisenhower was still in office. He taught me to fish in that lake and to listen to the birds, not just shoot at them. I served 30 years protecting land just like this, from people who thought money made them entitled. I didn't ask for this fight, but I won't walk away from it. Not when people like you. I turned toward Karen. Try to fence in the world and call it progress. Silence. Then applause. Not loud, but real. Judge Withers thanked everyone and promised a formal review. But the tide had turned. The crowd didn't wait for a verdict. They knew. Over the next weeks, the fallout was steady and brutal. Karen resigned in disgrace. Her brother faced a state ethics board. Josh, after a plea deal, did court-mandated trail restoration under federal oversight. I passed him once planting reeds near the marsh. He couldn't look me in the eye. I didn't force it. The HOA board was dismantled. A new council formed with rotating leadership and no more closed-door deals. The fence was torn down, the red paint scrubbed clean. Even the concrete posts were repurposed into benches along the restored trail. One morning, as the sun rose over the lake, I stood at the dock with Scout and watched a family of marsh owls glide across the surface, just inches above the water. The same bloodline we'd protected. Susan and the kids stayed through spring. We fixed up the attic and turned it into a reading room. June donated a shelf of old maps. Lauren published a follow-up piece titled Honor in the Reeds. And me? I kept the flannel shirt, kept the decoys, kept the land. Justice didn't come in a single bang. It came slow, like ice melting in April. But when it came, it stayed. Because some ground, once defended, never gets taken again. And this ground? This was my father's. Now it's mine. And I'll be damned if anyone ever touches it again.